On behalf of the Heritage Foundation and welcoming everybody to Heritage is my colleague Becky Norton Dunlop. Mrs. Dunlop serves as the External Relations Vice President here at the Heritage Foundation. Please join in welcoming her. Becky?
Thank you very much, John, and let me add my words of welcome on behalf of the Heritage Foundation. It's our privilege today to co-host this program with the Westminster Institute. Our guests today were brought to the attention of the Heritage Foundation by Catherine Gorka. Thank you so much for introducing us to these brave world leaders who are advocates for religious freedom. The Heritage Foundation is an advocate for religious freedom. Most often these days we're engaged in discussions on this topic here in the United States of America. But today we're talking about this topic as it relates for people in another part of the world. The Westminster Foundation is an institute that was established in 2009 to promote individual dignity and freedom for people throughout the world by sponsoring high-quality research with a particular focus on the threats from extremism and radical ideologies. It promotes individual dignity and freedom, and that is certainly a mission that they share with those of us here at the Heritage Foundation. Today, it is my privilege to welcome our guest to the Heritage Foundation. We appreciate your making the Heritage Foundation one of the stops here on your brief visit to the United States as you bring the message that you have to the leaders of this country and to our citizens who are so concerned about people elsewhere in the world. This is the first delegation of Syrian Christian leaders to visit the United States since the start of the Civil War. And they are going to talk to us today about the current crisis facing Christians in Syria. They are here to raise the awareness of the threats against Christians in Syria and the growing plight that they face. This visit, it is their hope that this visit will provide opportunities for them to discuss various options and steps that can be taken by the global church and the global community to protect Christians and religious minorities in Syria. I'm going to invite to the podium now the gentleman who will actually moderate this program, and that is the Right Reverend Julian M. Dobbs. Reverend Dobbs is a bishop of Cana East and the missionary bishop of the Convocation of Anglicans in North America. He is a member of the College of Bishops of the Anglican Church in North America and the Church of Nigeria. He also serves as the U.S. Executive Director for the Barnabas Aid USA, where he developed awareness of persecuted Christians and the challenge of a resurgent Islam. He has traveled extensively internationally and ministered with the Suffering Church across 6 continents, including Laos, Malaysia, Syria, Egypt, Nigeria, and North Korea. Following the Indian Ocean tsunami, the bishop's work in Indonesia was recognized by the New Zealand government, who awarded him with the New Zealand Special Services Medal. He holds both a master's and licentiate in theology, and in 2012 was awarded a Doctor of Divinity degree. He serves on the board of the Westminster Institute and is the vice chairman of Barnabas Aid International. Reverend Dobbs.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunlop, so much for your invitation and welcome, and to be here at Heritage this afternoon. I also want to acknowledge the presence of the International Director of Barnabas Aid, Dr. Patrick Sukdeo, who will address us briefly at the conclusion of our time. Syria's destructive civil war has now been raging for more than 3 years. Millions of helpless Christians are caught in the crossfire with very few to defend them. Syria used to be one of the easiest places in the Arab world to be a Christian across the Middle East. The church has existed there since biblical times. In early 2011, Syria's churches were large, perhaps 10% of the population, maybe even more. And Christians were respected by the Muslim majority. They were, by and large, allowed to worship and practice their faith without much official interference. But all this has changed dramatically for the worse since hostilities between the government and opposition forces broke out. As many as 9 million Syrians have been displaced from their homes. Well over 400,000 Christians, you'll hear from our panelists, have been displaced. 2.4 million Syrians fled into neighboring countries. Christians in their homelands have been attacked and invaded. The city of Homs almost completely cleared of its Christian population. Houses ransacked, believers kidnapped for ransom, gruesomely murdered. You'll hear some of these stories this afternoon. And yet much of the Western world, much of the Western church, and much of the Western media remains silent about this unacceptable situation. And that is why the Barnabas Aid and Westminster was pleased to bring the delegation that you have before you this afternoon of Syrian leaders who have come here to the United States to raise the very serious concerns about the situations that the Christian community faces in that ancient nation of Syria. Allow me, it's my great pleasure to introduce our panel to you this afternoon. Sitting immediately to my left, Bishop Dionysius John Kawak, the Metropolitan of the Syrian Orthodox Church. Bishop Kawak served at St. Ephraim's Church here in Washington, D.C., and also in a parish in Indiana. He is the president of the Patriarchal Development Committee. He serves as the Patriarchal Director and Spiritual Director of Youth Programs at the Syrian Orthodox Archdiocese in Damascus. Your Grace, you are very welcome. Sitting next to him, my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Riyad Jajur, the Presbyterian clergyman from Syria, now based in Lebanon, who has senior roles in many Middle East Christian organizations. Riyad was formerly the General Secretary of the Middle East Council of Churches and is currently the chairperson of the Board of Forum for Development, Culture and Dialogue. He administers much of the aid that is distributed by Barnabas Aid in Syria. Dr. Riyad, you're very welcome, and it's so good to see you here in Washington, D.C. Sitting next to Dr. Riyad is my colleague, His Grace, Bishop Amash Nalbandian, the primate of the Armenian Church of Damascus, who was born in Aleppo, Syria. The Armenian community elected him to serve as primate in the fall of 2004. In 2006, he was consecrated as a bishop by the Catholicos, all Armenians, His Holiness. Your Grace, it's very good to have you, and we welcome you here on the panel this afternoon. And sitting immediately to his left, my colleague, the Reverend Adib Awad. Welcome. Reverend Awad currently serves as the Vice Moderator of the National Evangelical Synod of Syria and Lebanon. He has also held the position of General Secretary of the National Evangelical Synod of Syria and Lebanon and has pastored multiple Presbyterian congregations in both Lebanon and Syria. Reverend Awad, you're very welcome, and welcome to our nation's capital. I'm going to ask two of our panelists to initially present to you on the situation in Syria. And after they have presented, we will open for questions to which all the panelists will share with us this afternoon. And so I invite, first of all, my colleague, Dr. Riyad Jajur. Will you come and present to us, sir? You're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Bishop Julian, and thanks to the Heritage Foundation for inviting us and making this time available for our presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to talk about the situation. I have 10 minutes, and I will try in these 10 minutes to briefly give an introduction about the situation and then, as the bishop said, Bishop John will follow, and then Reverend Adib Awad will give also 5 minutes as comment on the crisis as well. I must say that I am someone who has lived in the Middle East all my life, and when I was General Secretary of the Middle East Council of Churches, as the bishop said, I have organized in the year 1996 and 1999 two of the most important meetings of the Christian leaders in the Middle East. They were attended by all the patriarchs and archbishops and bishops and Christian leaders in the region, and the major emphasis was about Christian presence and witness in the Middle East today. Since that time, our churches have been very much concerned and paying attention to our Christian presence, which they have seen is being shaken, and it is not as it should be, and which requires church unity on the one hand and involvement in the issues that are affecting and touching the Christian community all over the region. Since then, the Christian leadership has felt that we as a Christian community, we are under somehow a threat because of the mass immigration of the Christians from the region. There were many and maybe thousands of Christians that they were not satisfied with the way they have been living in, and maybe history, starting with the Ottoman and what happened to the Armenians and so on, and then, of course, later with what happened in Iraq, made so many of them feel they are not comfortable. But definitely, there was this decisive action of the churches to stay and continue their Christian witness to the resurrected Lord, which they have carried and which they have done from the very beginning till now. And that's why they said, we live in a region, in a Muslim context. We have to see how we and our Muslim brothers and sisters can live and coexist together and say we are an indigenous Christian community that want to live on equal rights, with full rights, and to see that whatever we want to do as a Christian community is to be respected by the authorities. And definitely, so many of you who have maybe visited the region, and I am sure that Bishop Vicain and Dr. Medini and many others who have been walking through with us in that time, they have seen how much we have enjoyed religious freedom and how much specifically in Syria we have seen how Christians and Muslims were doing very well with each other. And I must say, with many delegations, with heads of churches from Europe and the USA, have been to Damascus. And more than once, I was a witness of how even the Archbishop of Canterbury gave a sermon in the Keftaro Mosque for thousands of people who were there. These were times where I would say that Christians have enjoyed this, and they were looked in favor. And of course, this doesn't mean there were no pressure, that there were not problems. No, we must not say that it was fully paradise, but there were things that happened sometimes even in Egypt or in Syria, but mostly in Egypt. If you want to make a repair in a church, you need to ask for permission. There was something like that. And then, of course, came the situation in Iraq, which definitely has made the Christians seriously worry about their presence. And with the Christians of Iraq dropping down to almost 70% who have immigrated, this was, I believe, the signal that we Christians are not that much welcome where we were born and witnessed for years. Before the uprising in the Arab world, we have been living together with others, and we have been doing quite well. But since then, things have definitely changed. And when the Syria uprising took place, I must say that there were many Christians who were also, with other of their national competitors, were looking for democracy and reform. But unfortunately, very soon when things have drifted into another direction, things became quite bad, and the Christian community started to suffer. And to make things brief, our suffering as a Christian community started especially since many radical Islamist groups came to fight in Syria. We have more than maybe 15 or 20,000, I'm not sure about the number, of armed militants, jihadis, who have come from more than maybe 50 or 60 countries all over the world to fight in Syria. And definitely the fighting was against the government regime, and it turned out later to be more or less, and maybe some people don't like this, but it became a sectarian fighting where Sunnites and Alawites were fighting each other, and the Christians were boxed in, and they were threatened, and in many places they were forced out of their homes. I must admit that many Christians were uprooted from their homeland and from their homes and became internally displaced or became refugees outside Syria. And I must start from the north part of Syria in several areas where the Christians were either forced to leave or they have to adopt to new laws by either Al-Nusra group or others who wanted them to either be like them or they have no place with them. We have witnessed from the very beginning in the city of Homs how when the militants were cornered in Khaldiye and Baba Amr, how they came to the Christian quarter of the city of Homs. And somehow they occupied that Christian quarter that has the most ancient churches in Syria. And all the Christians of that Christian quarter somehow were forced to leave. All the churches, and more than maybe 8 of them, were destroyed and they were shelled. And people have been uprooted from their homes that they have been living in. And that area is well known to be the Christian base in the city of Homs. And with 80,000 and even more that were uprooted from there, this was a sign that the Christians started to suffer the crisis and the war that we have been witnessing. Up till now, I must tell you, there are about 80 Christians who have been held by the militants as human shields in the old city of Homs, and they are not free to leave. And of course, this is only an example of what happened, and definitely this has been the case in many churches later on all over Syria. In Aleppo, our evangelical church was bombed. Other churches were attacked. Many Christians have to leave. Same is in many villages, you know, in the near Latakia to the Aleppo. Other churches like the famous church of Ma'lula, for example. And who would ever think that this ancient city of Ma'lula, a beautiful village or small town of Ma'lula, that is a symbol of the old Christianity in Syria, will be attacked. And it is people were forced to leave, and those who went in, unfortunately, they did break the Christian symbols, and the people were, those who were not killed, they escaped, and definitely this was the beginning that led later on to the Qalamun battle, and where the town of Sadad was attacked by hundreds of militants. And Sadad is mentioned, by the way, in the Bible, in Numbers. And it is one of these old Syrian Orthodox towns. And I come from a village next to Sadad. And I have lived the agony and the suffering of my people who most of them had to leave, and more than 2,000 were captured by these militants, and before they left, they have killed 44 of them, including 7 elderly who were tied with their hands behind their back. They were shot in the head, and including an old woman and man, 70 and 80, and a child of 9 years, and they were thrown in the well of their home, and the bishops have to later on pull them and have their funeral. This doesn't mean that, you know, there is a war against the Christians, but it is there. I mean, when you say this. There are some good signs, like, for example, when these people of Sadat had to leave, the people of the village of Humayra and Darati, who are Muslims, they shouldered them and they took care of them. And we are people who are from that region, and we do have good relationship. And when the militants went into the church of Darati and they wanted to burn the church as they did in Sadat and to write slogans as they want, the Muslims of Darati stood in the church and told the militants, you will do this over our dead bodies. You cannot do it. So there are good signs. But at the same time, I must say that today our Christian community is a broken community. It is a suffering community. And it is uprooted from many areas. And we have thousands and thousands of IDPs who are now not in their homes and waiting to see what to do. Maybe more than 400,000, we can say, have been IDPs or immigrated or left the country. But if things continue the way it is, there will come a time where there will be no more Christians in Syria. I think it is not only going to be that the Syrian Christians have lost, but also the Syrian Muslims have lost also good people. So no doubt that with the situation as it is now, if the radical Muslims continue the way they are, I don't think there will be a future for any of us over there. What is needed, we need to see that there is enforcement of a political solution that lead to peace, justice, and dignity, and equal citizenship, and the freedom for all of us. Thank you very much.
And now I invite Bishop John from the Syrian Orthodox Church, my brother, come and present to us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Before to start, we need to stress 2 facts. First of all, the Christians are not recently arrived communities in Syria and the Middle East. Secondly, we can say that the Christians are an integral part of the Syrian society. The presence of the Christian in Syria has decreased in the past century and a half in a similar manner to demographic trends throughout the Middle East. If we take a look at the map of the region today, we will find that thousands of churches and monasteries have been destroyed. Throughout the past 150 years, Christians in Syria have experienced different periods of fear for their future. Massacres targeting the Syrian Orthodox and the Armenians started already in the years 1860 to 1895. The 2 world wars also left behind a vast number of Christian martyrs. The Christians in Syria have not been immune to the consequences of these developments. Vast numbers of Syrian Christians have migrated to various parts of the world. Of course, the Eastern churches strive to encourage Christians to stay in their homeland by reducing fear, but we do not always succeed in reducing immigration. Indeed, we cannot blame those who decide to protect their children from bullets and rockets fired in hate. We always wonder, does history repeat itself? At the beginning of the Syrian crisis, Archbishop Yohanna Ibrahim of Aleppo was asked, Will the Christian in Syria be impacted in a similar manner as the Christians in Iraq? He answered, the Christians in Iraq were wounded in the heart when some of the extremists declared that the time of the Christian presence in Iraq has long gone. The extremists carried out persecution against the Christian, especially in the northern city of Mosul, killing an esteemed archbishop, many priests, deacons, and Christian faithful. This has been a negative phenomenon in the life of a land that was founded on unity and coexistence. In Syria, the Christians never came across this phenomenon in their recent or distant past. These were the words of Mar Gregorius Yohanna Ibrahim, Metropolitan of Aleppo, for the Syrian Orthodox Church in one of the interviews on the situation of Christians in Syria. It never occurred to anyone that the owner of these words would himself end up in captivity. Here, I ask you, without trying to reduce the comprehensive realities of sabotage and destruction in Syria, to allow me to mention something that has touched the Christians in Syria deeply: the kidnapping of the Orthodox nuns from the monastery of St. Takla in Malula and the two archbishops, Yohanna Ibrahim and Boulos Yazgi, on April 22, 2013. The abduction of the nuns and the two archbishops, as well as other Christian clerics and priests who were killed, has a very negative impact on the Christian presence in Syria. It has increased fear within our communities and has contributed to the refugee and migration crisis. This war has destroyed many of the monasteries and churches in Syria. The war and its trampling of human rights has caused the loss of many human lives, as well as destruction of our history, culture, and heritage. Over 30 or 40 churches had been either damaged or destroyed completely. In addition to that, targeting the clergy and the churches in various areas, we cannot overlook the attacks on Christians themselves that have taken place in different areas with Christian majority. This violence is worrying all Syrians and will affect the Christian presence in Syria, leading many to seriously think about immigration if they have not already done so. In short, this is the reality of Christians in today's Syria. The future, however, remains in God's hand. What the Christians desire is really simple. They want to continue to be an integral part of Syrian society. They also want to share the desire of many of their fellow moderate Muslim citizens to reform, root out corruption, and build a secular democratic state in which political parties can compete according to an commonly respected constitution. This will helpfully allow the different political parties to flourish and be part of the new Syria. This common commitment to coexistence will provide the optimism necessary to diminish the power of sectarian fanaticism. Syrian Christians prefer to see a separation between religion and state politics. Christians in general have been open-minded individuals without discriminatory attitude, who are open to the society around them. In addition, they have been mostly united in an attitude of neutrality and have sought to avoid participation in religious and sectarian conflicts. Syrian Christians are working for a social justice, resulting in equality among the citizens of the new Syria. They do not want to be disadvantaged as a minority without equal rights. This will help lessen the risk of migration that is now uprooting many of them and threatening their survival and effective presence in the community. Unfortunately, these ideals are being pushed into the future. During this present crisis, Christians in Syria are working for safety and survival. With other groups, the Syriac Orthodox Church is directly responding to the needs of internally displaced people inside the country, seeking to bring moments of peace by addressing the needs of vulnerable population. When peace prevails, Christians will again turn their attention to the tasks of building the economy, achieving social justice, and promoting the concept of citizenship with full equality among all. They are very concerned about being classified as second or third-class citizen. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude my speech with extracts from a letter sent by His Holiness our Patriarch, the Patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church, to the President Bashar al-Assad on July the 2nd, 2011, almost at the beginning of the crisis, showing clearly what Syria Christians in Syria look forward to. His Holiness said, "The Syrian Church faithful everywhere oppose all aspects of violence and stand by the side of peace, stability, and security, and focus on that dialogue which should be everyone's language." In an important point about the Syriac Church attitude in regard to citizenship, His Holiness added, "If a citizen is treated equally in his country, it makes him closer and increases his attachment to his land." And in his position as the Supreme Chief of the Syriac Church in the world, His Holiness said, "Building a strong and healthy base of education with emphasis on freedom of expression and religious tolerance of multiple ethnic groups and cultures will help everyone be loyal to his or her homeland." I'm sure that you all have seen and have been moved by the horrific images coming out from my country, Syria. I'm equally certain that you feel the need to help the Christian community there. However, in order to do that, you must think about helping my country as a whole. There are more than 5 million internally displaced people, including large number of women and children, and about 2 million refugees in neighboring countries living in very poor conditions. The war tearing the fabric of my country has really become a major humanitarian crisis by itself. This crisis affects Muslims along with Christians, so concern for my community is linked to concern for all of my Syrian neighbors in all their diversity. You may be asking, what can be done to help? My response is that you need to lead your country, the United States of America, and the entire international community on 2 tracks. First, we need your help in responding fully to our difficult humanitarian crisis. Second, we need your help to convince all fighting factions to use dialogue rather than power. All Syrians must come together to remind ourselves of our common bonds and to walk together into a future of coexistence and mutual respect. Every day that passes without dialogue pushes us further toward despair. We need for you to help us discover the possibilities of dialogue. These are tremendous tasks, but they are well worth the effort. Thank you very much.
We now have some brief comments by our brother Awad. Come and address us, please, and then we'll move to some questions.
Thank you. As I was walking inside the foundation, I noticed the announcement about this meeting, and I wanted to check the time and about the speakers. And my attention was drawn immediately to the title, Marked for Destruction. Now, if this is what this foundation says, I'm bothered, I'm disappointed. But if St. Paul says it, it's okay with me. Let me read to you what St. Paul says. Immediately my mind flashed to what St. Paul said about the church. That is 1 Corinthians 4, 9 to 13. He says, "For I think that God has exhibited us as last of all, like men sentenced to death, because we have become a spectacle to the world." Amazing. "To angels and to men. We are fools for Christ's sake, but you are wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are held in honor, but we in disrepute. To the present hour we hunger and thirst. We are poorly dressed and buffeted and homeless, and we labor working with our own hands. When reviled we bless. When persecuted we endure. When slandered, we entreat. We have become and are still like the scum of the world, the refuse of all things. I accept that from St. Paul, but not from this foundation. Yes, we are proud as a church in Syria to have this blessing of being the scum of the world for Jesus Christ. The church in the Middle East suffered a lot. In 622, almost 100% of the area was Christian. Due to persecution, due to pressures, due to killings, we are now altogether maybe less than 20% of the population. As I was walking inside, I noticed a small pamphlet, one-page pamphlet, on one of the tables. It was talking about falling in love with America again. I liked it very, very much, because at one time I fell in love with America, and I want to revive that love. It says, in falling in love with America again, Jim reminds us that America's real heroes are not to be found strolling through the corridors of power or ensconced in the mansions of the rich and famous. Beautiful. Rather, they are the modest man and woman who lives next door. I'll tell you part of my early life. I studied in the American School for Boys and Girls in Latakia, Syria. And I lived all my childhood, adolescence, and teen life in the church of Latakia and in the American School for Boys and Girls. And then I moved to another American university and to the seminary. But I learned in the American school the basis of my life. I learned what we used to call American values at that time, but later I discovered they are Christian values. But simply because our history books were books of the American history of the United States, the geography of the United States, the writers and poets of the of the United States. But I want to relate to two incidents back in my mind that affected my life so much that pertain to our situation. There are hundreds of incidents that pertain to different things. But these two come to my mind now as I come to the United States. When I was in my early adolescence, you know, every Monday morning, that is after a weekend, 2 minutes. Well, okay. I have to stick to that. I think I can't finish, but every Monday morning, all the students, boys and girls, had to line up, salute the flag. The principal of our school, Mr. Hutchison, always stood in front of us all with his wife, with Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, with Miss McClurkin, with Miss McElroy, and so on. And he stood, all of them alert, Americans, looking at the Syrian flag. Now, when I was 14 years or 15, teenager, I couldn't swallow it any longer. I thought he was a hypocrite. So in one of the classes, and us students, boys and girls, spoke like that. He is a hypocrite, he and his family. Then I couldn't stand it any longer. I said in one of the classes, ethics, and we were talking about something relating to hypocrisy and so on. I said, Mr. Hutchison, excuse me, I can't swallow it any longer. These days I'm not sleeping. I have to say it. He said, say it, Adib. I said, students say that you're standing with us saluting the flag is hypocrisy. And he smiled. He said, you know, I think you ought to think that way. But what do you think? I said, I think you are a hypocrite. And he said, look, let me tell you, I want to teach you to love your country. An American missionary wanted to teach me to love my country. And he said, that flag is the symbol of your country. You should love your country, and you should serve your country, and you should work for your country. The other incident was one of our teachers was Miss McClurkin. She was a young lady, under 40. Her brother, her only brother, was a super saber fighter in Korea, and he was shot down and killed. And the news came. So us, the students, thought that we would have a vacation or no class that day. But anyway, we have to come to class. And we were all frowning like this, you know, feeling with her, sad for her brother, teenagers. When she came in, smiling, with a brilliant dress and a flower here, and she said, good morning, folks. How are you today? Good, miss. She said, why are you sad this day? And of course, she told us that she will miss her brother, but she is not sad because her brother is with Christ. Imagine what that does to a boy of 14 years of age, even in days like this. So Syria has always been the country, as you have heard from both dignitaries, the land of coexistence and love and understanding. So we accept to be marked for destruction if it comes from Paul's mouth. But we do not accept to be marked for destruction by terrorists coming from 83 countries, sent, funded, and armed by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. We cannot accept that. Last, I have a lot to say. Of course, I'm here not to beg aid for my country or for my churches. I'm here because of the colossal effort and sacrifices my dear brother Patrick Sokhdio is putting forth to create hope among Syrian clergy and people, and also in memory of the beloved American Presbyterian righteous women and men who taught me. Their graveyards are on their left side of the entrance of the Lataka Church till now. Some of them were girls that died at the age of 2. Some of them young women, young men. Americans carried values to the world, those old fathers and mothers. The Westminster Institute drew my attention. I want to know who this institute is a non-governmental policy institute whose mission is to promote individual dignity and freedom for people throughout the world. That's great. But look, greater is to come. The institute fulfills this mission by sponsoring high-quality independent research by scholars and policy analysts with a particular focus on the threat posed by extremism and radical ideologies, sponsoring high-quality independent research by scholars. That is what America and the world needs. Thank you. Sorry for the extra.
Thank you, Reverend. We have some time for questions before we have to conclude. If you'd like to raise your hand and we can take the microphone to you. Yes, here in the back. If you would introduce yourself, please, so we know who you are and who you're representing.
Hi, my name is Mina Abdel Malak. I'm a Coptic Egyptian and I'm representing myself. My question is, being a Coptic from Egypt, I have witnessed a couple of models for the Christian of the Middle East. The Iraqi model that disappeared now, like the Christian of Iraq, like they disappeared now, or like they being killed. And the Coptic church that slowly disappearing as well. And the Lebanese Christian that they try to defend themselves. Where do you see the Syrian Christians going?
I think the Syrian Christians are in a stage of hopelessness. And they do feel that they are, at the moment, unaccepted. If the present circumstances stands as it is now, they are not accepted by their neighbors whom they have been living with for some time. And they are being somehow not persecuted as much as pressured to leave. They are not wanted. What we need to see today, we need to see our Muslim friends to say, you are needed and we want you to continue to be here. And this we don't hear. We don't hear non-Christian voices asking the Christians to stay as such. And that's the problem. And I think if things continue the way it is now, there will be no more Christians left in Syria. When churches are destroyed, monasteries are occupied or destroyed, it is our symbol, you know. Always a Christian community will get together around its church or monastery. When that doesn't exist anymore, they are lost. They have to leave, and they are leaving. So if there is no drastic change in what's going on, and if we are, as Reverend Adibawat said, if the radicals and the terrorists don't leave Syria immediately, and there is a stop to violence, I think we will not exist anymore. I must mention two examples of what happened recently. Recently, you know, and maybe the bishop should tell that, when they had their feast, how someone brought them a box as a gift to the kids. When the kids opened the box, what they found in it was not a gift. It was two heads of two Armenians that were cut and sent to them as a gift. And I must say that this is happening just to scare the Christian community. Just, you know, 2 weeks ago, our Orthodox bishop, who is with us now and who came unfortunately late, had a funeral of a young Christian without his head because the militants killed him. They cut his head and they took the head with them. He had to have the funeral of the body without the head. These things remind me of what happened in the very beginning of the Lebanese war, when they used to do that so that people get scared and they start getting fighting with each other, scaring each other. We as Christians are being scared of what's going on. These events make us feel we are not comfortable to stay anymore.
Thank you. Riyad, the bishop, is going to speak also.
Yes, thank you. I am the Armenian bishop in Damascus. Let me say something. How do I understand myself in Syria? I said many times, several times, I will repeat it again because this is a fact. I am not a Christian in Syria. I am Syrian Christian. You know, it's a different. I am not something new in the Syrian society, Syrian life, Syrian identity. I am in Syria. I am Syrian Christian. So when we speak about Syria, the identity is, this identity includes also the Christian faith. So it is my duty to save myself, to keep my presence in Syria, in this world. Of course, what you say, and as Pastor Jarjour said, many symbols like the kidnapping of the bishops or priests or kidnapping of nuns, they are symbols for us. They are struggling for peace, for love, and for understanding. You know, this affect of the Christian population. Our expectations is from the world, as America, as Pastor Adib said, maybe to give hope to these people in humanitarian relief and to give them this importance to keep the presence of the Christians in Middle East and especially in Syria. And also the solidarity that we can say, you are Christians, you are not alone in this area of the world. This is very important. And you know, I hear a little bit Islamophobia in your question, and me as Armenian, I witnessed the genocide in the beginning of the 20th century, and now and after then I was welcomed in an Islam country in Syria, and the Islams, they opened their doors and accepted us, and they shared their daily bread. So it is very important for, let's say, for the world community to do everything to stop the violence and to give hope and to support the Christian churches, Christian people to stay there, and maybe in that case to understand better Islam, because we are living with Islam and we are aware that Islam also contains the values or the principles of love, of peace, and so we can be the advocate of interreligious dialogue and interreligious coexistence in Syria, and also the mutual understanding of these two religions.
Thank you, Bishop. We have a question right down the very back, if we can take the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Ahmed Al-Indi. I'm a Syrian Christian. I have a question about why can't we blame also Assad regime for what's happening in Syria now? at the beginning of the uprising in Syria in March 2011, the majority of the protests and the protest movement were secular people, people who protested for democracy and for human rights. And now, currently, there's like a lot of radical groups, Al-Nusra and Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. But let's not forget that one of these groups, like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, was supported by the Assad regime in Iraq, where it targeted the Iraqi Christian. Let's not forget the Lebanese Christian that were targeted by the regime of Assad. And also, let's not forget that the regime, at the first place, targeted all the secular people inside Syria in the uprising. We have now 7 million refugees.
Yes, your question, if you could bring to a question for us, please.
The question is why we are not blaming Assad for what's happening to the Syrian Christian. I mean, like, we have like millions of people that left the country.
Okay, Brother Awad, would you answer for us, please?
Why we are not blaming Assad for the plight of the Christians?
Yes, if you could answer that for us.
Well, although I don't like to talk politics, but did you hear me say terrorists from 83 countries are pouring into Syria? I mean, doesn't that mean anything to us?
No, what about Iran and the terrorists that are coming from Iran? We have a lot of groups, Hezbollah, fighting in Syria.
Yes, Hezbollah started fighting.
Is it a terrorist group?
Exactly, but
Let's let our brother answer the question, please.
but
Thank
tell
you.
me, how do you justify countries, regional countries, supporting terrorists from 83 countries in the world? Afghanis, Shishan, Egyptian, Libyan, etc., etc. All this is how it started. Look, when the demonstration started in March 2011, all the Christians were for the call for reforms, but all of a sudden we discovered the terrorists pouring in from outside, the arms, and killing, and how can we justify the kidnapping of 11 nuns who were in their monastery? How can we justify the kidnapping of 2 bishops? One has to work their brain, not only our emotions.
It's not my question.
Okay, I'd like to move on to another question. We have a number who are asking questions. The Bishop, Reverend Awad, has given an answer. Over here, sir, on my left.
Yeah, Archbishop Aykazian, Armenian Orthodox Church. I would like to express my thanks to the panelists and their presentation, which was very helpful. I just came back a few days ago from Geneva. I was attending a meeting of the religious leader, Christian religious leaders from around the world to discuss the situation of Syria. And Mr. Brahimi, the special envoy, was present at that time. He told us that there are almost 2,000 terrorist groups within Syria fighting against the Syrians. This is extremely dangerous. And one of the saddest part of it that the 3 closest allies to us, to United States, are the supporter of those terrorist groups. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. What we heard recently from a group of...
So if you could bring your,
Yes.
your statement to a question, we'd be grateful because of our time. Thank
Yes.
you.
The Turkey has been sometimes refusing to accept the Christian refugees. What do you think we could do to convince our government, our administration, to ask those 3 countries just to give up, to stop helping the terrorists?
Okay, we will conclude in a moment, and I'll ask Dr. Sukhdev, our International Director, to make a comment with regards to what we can do here in the United States. But I'd like to take one last question. We're out of time. Right at the very back in front of the camera, you've had your hand up, sir.
Yes, my name is Fadi Shadid from Arabic Baptist Church here in Washington, D.C. Since we're talking about the persecuted church, we're talking about, the nightmare that it's really nice to hear when we talk about, whole of Syria and the concern for all Syrians, because it is an all of Syrians and not just Christians. But my question in particular maybe to the evangelical panelists. The persecuted church, Syria was on the list of persecuted church long before the uprising. In 2010, we were number 30, 38 on the list of persecuted churches. I know in 2010, about 10 evangelical churches were closed in 2010. And maybe your office signed off on these closings. Foreign missionaries are not allowed into Syria for 40-some years. There's no theological school in Syria. People have to go to Jordan or Lebanon to study Christian theology. Can you speak about the persecuted church before the uprising, please?
I'm sorry to say that this is not correct. There are Christian theological schools in Syria. There is the Syrian Orthodox. He is a teacher there, and there are other schools. And I don't think of any foreign missionary that wanted to go to Syria and he was not allowed in. We do have many missionaries, even of our church, that went in and out. But definitely what you are referring to is the 10 churches in the north of Syria. They were closed because some of these, they were not churches, they were home churches where there was an evangelism taking place of many people. And I think this irritated not only the Muslim community, but it irritated the traditional churches there. And it was the churches there that said they don't want to see that this is happening because of what they call sheep stealing or evangelism to them. But otherwise, I do believe that there was no something called religious persecution in Syria before that. I have the authority to say this with my colleagues, the bishops here, who have been, the definition of what is religious persecution needs to be identified. But definitely, this was also the case when so many missionaries went into Iraq, when the invasion of Iraq took place, and they were evangelizing everybody. And that's why this is a very serious matter, not only to non-Christians, but to the Christian church itself.
Thank you, Reverend. I'd like to invite the International Director of Barnabas Fund International to address us with some concluding remarks about how we can make some response to this situation. Dr. Sukhdev.
Bishop Julian, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are faced with a major problem. 9/11 here saw the US brutally attacked by evil men. And it was absolutely right that your government pursued those culprits and to ensure that they did not continue to ply their trade. Sadly, Al-Qaeda has not died. Contrary to popular opinion, it's alive. And sadly, its nexus is proving to be today's Syria. I believe that all of us that live in the free world, in the Middle East and elsewhere, needs to work together to see the end of Al-Qaeda and the ideologies that drives it. And those ideologies emanate, sadly, from those countries that we regard to be our allies, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and increasingly Turkey. So my fellow bishops, we are agreed, whether we are evangelical, Orthodox, or Catholic, that those foreign terrorists that are now in Syria must go, they must be dealt with, and we appeal to the US, where we have this common understanding that we want to see a society freed from violence. And I would hope that this present administration and its security services will work to that end. But let me conclude. In 1910, a noted American historian wrote an intriguing work on minorities within the then Ottoman Empire. He predicted that a day would come when Christian minorities would pay for their very existence with their lives. That proved true in 1915, that saw the genocide of the Armenian and Syrian communities. But the point to note is this. In 1910, he warned of what was to come, and he called on nations such as the US, the UK, Germany, France, and others to take notice of what was to come and to try to avert it. They did nothing. They stood by and watched as over 1.5 million, and that genocide was the precursor to what was to fall the Jewish community under Nazism, another genocide. Today we are faced with the potential extinction of the church, not just in Syria, we have seen it in Iraq. Potentially, if Syria collapses, we face it in Lebanon and other surrounding countries. We would plead with you as fellow Christians to recognize the solidarity that we have and to pray for and become involved with our brothers and sisters in these contexts. We would plead for your media to break the silence. Why is it that the media of the Western world chooses not to address what is happening to the minorities, whether it be Shia, Sunni, and others, and the moderate Muslims who are being butchered? Why is it that all the information that comes is only one side? I would urge your administration to be even-handed and to recognize that under the UN principle of responsibility to protect, that the international community, coupled with individual countries, have a duty and a responsibility to protect beleaguered minorities. We cannot sit by and watch a community go to the wall. We cannot continue to be silent. The time has come to break the silence. And if this visit does nothing less than address this issue, then we will have begun to break that silence. But we need you. We have got some leaflets. We have a petition on Syria, which we hope you will fill in. If you want more information, please do contact Barnabas Aid and the Westminster Institute. And we are deeply appreciative, Becky, for you here at Heritage. As you can see from what Adib has said, Syria and the Christians of Syria have been shaped by American values. And Heritage stands for American values. So stand with us at this time. Thank you.
Let me add my words of thanks to our distinguished panel for coming here and to Westminster and Barnabas for allowing them to be here. I think everyone who has come to this program today is a leader in the community and a person of influence. Hopefully the discussion that we have begun today about this tragedy facing the Syrian Christians and other Christians around the world will not fall on deaf ears, but will be taken to more readily listening ears in our government and others. Thank you all very much for attending, and we are now dismissed.